Welcome to Ghost Education 101, where curiosity meets experience and the doors to the entire paranormal landscape are finally open. Hosted by Dr. Heather Leigh and Dr. Tiffany Frazier, this series is built for everyone who wants to understand the unexplained the right way. Whether you're just stepping into the unknown or you've been investigating for years, this is the place where you can sharpen your approach, deepen your understanding, and cut through the misconceptions that have overrun this field for far too long. Each episode walks you through the full spectrum of paranormal activity. Classic hauntings, intelligent spirits, cryptids, elemental beings, poltergeist phenomena, and the modern challenges investigators face today. We break it all down. The science, the method, and the mystery, without dumbing it down and without drifting into theatrics. Grounded in research, history, and real-world investigation, Ghost Education 101 is your classroom, your laboratory, and your gateway into the most compelling unexplained experiences on record. Learn, question, discover. Welcome to Ghost Education 101. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Heather Leigh and Dr. Tiffany Frazier.
Evening, everyone. Hey, Tiffany, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you back. We missed you last week.
I know. I'm feeling a lot better.
Yeah. And for those of you who missed last week too, just like Tiffany, you guys got to go back and watch that replay. It was an amazing show. We had Mark Muncy and Nicole Strickland back on the show, as well as Craig Owens and Mark Nesbitt of Ghost of Gettysburg talking about his paranormal historians. So it was a lot of fun. Definitely learned a lot, and they had a lot of great advice.
Awesome.
And today is going to be like every other show. It's probably going to be one of my favorites in the top up there, but we do have another returning guest to Ghost Education 101. He's brought many panels to us over the years. So I'm going to just bring him in. Welcome, Loyd. How are you doing today?
Hi. I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for joining us again. So happy to have you here tonight.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So what do you have in store for us tonight?
Well, a talk about psychics and mediums and how to find one, how to work with them, how do you decide whether they are psychic and whether that even matters sometimes.
Yeah. And like we were talking before the show, it's perfect timing because we had that psychic panel about 3 weeks ago, and then we've had 2 psychics on back to back. So perfect timing for the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about before we get started, or are you ready to get started?
I'm ready to start.
Yeah,
go ahead and get going. Yeah. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions during the show, just post them. If they're important enough, I'll interrupt his presentation. If not, I will save them to the end of the show.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt me at any point, Heather.
Okay.
I teach different classes, and I don't mind if people interrupt me. That's
okay.
Not going to affect my flow at all.
Yep, there it is.
All right. So tonight I'm going to talk about how to choose a psychic or medium, assess claims and readings. And just a little bit for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm a director of a kind of a network of investigators called the Office of Paranormal Investigations. I am president of an organization called the Forever Family Foundation, which certifies mediums through scientific testing as evidential mediums and works specifically with the mediums in the family grieving process, and also supports the work of researchers looking at evidence for life after death. Possibly very important especially for something else that we've been talking about, and actually to this talk. I'm president of the Rhine Research Center Board of Directors. That is the nation's longest running laboratory, originally as the Duke University Parapsychology Lab. And they have an education center. I'll talk more about that later. I'm one of the principal instructors there. And I also teach a course occasionally for graduate students at Atlantic University. And I'm a mentalist and past president of the Psychic Entertainers Association. So I've had one foot in the field of parapsychology and one foot in the magic and mentalism world as well, which is where a lot of this information comes from. So first, a couple of things we'll be talking about. When you talk to psychics, it is important to know what the range of their psychic abilities is, and also important to know how we in parapsychology describe them, because if you go from what a psychic says and go into the science and the backup to that, you may see very different terms that are used. And I'm going to get into that as we go through. There is a range of abilities, and practitioners have a range of ways that they describe them, from psychic to psychic, medium to medium. There are the uses of divination techniques like tarot and palmistry and rune stones, and any number of them I'll talk a little bit about. And it's important for you to understand. And also, if you're going to be an investigator or just checking to see if a psychic is really psychic or a medium is really a medium, how to understand what they're saying, how to ask questions of them, especially in response to their claimed abilities. Now, to set that stage of terms, there is a difference between psychics and mediums, and I'll be talking a bit about that. We in parapsychology use the term psi, which, by the way, does not stand for anything. It's not an acronym. It is the 23rd letter of the Greek alphabet, which represents psyche or the mind. We study the abilities, experiences, the phenomena that fits under these three major buckets. One is extrasensory perception, which is information. It is not a sixth sense, by the way. It's perception, which is different than our senses. We look at psychokinesis, or mind over matter. That's action, interaction by the mind directly. And we look at survival of bodily death. And that would be technically paranormal existence, if you can survive the death of the body and stick around. It all has to do with consciousness, which is one of the major questions that's hitting a lot of fields of science these days. It's a good question. And the question is, what is consciousness? Nobody seems to know yet, or doesn't have an agreed upon definition. Of course, you hear about the term telepathy, and it's used by psychics and mediums. You know, there are everyday experiences we have as normal human beings that occasionally spontaneously happen. We pick up stuff from other people. They pick up stuff from us. Psychics may pick up things from us telepathically. It's not like reading your mind, however. That's more for entertainment and stage stuff that people do. And we certainly don't do deep dives into people's heads in that way. Mediums, by nature, because they're talking to or communicating with embodied people or spirits, are communicating by telepathy. It is consciousness to consciousness, mind to mind. So telepathy is a major piece for them. The other term that you hear often from psychics is clairvoyance, or the clairs. It's actually real-time ESP is what we would consider this, real-time psi. And clairvoyance is a term that we've used for a long time in our field for over 100 years, representing the real-time stuff, even though, yes, it does translate to clear seeing, but it's not just about visions. It's not just about visual stuff. It can be any sensory modality. And some psychics and mediums like to express how they get the information in terms of the clairs. So they might say, I'm clairaudient, because they are hearing the information or seemingly hearing the information, or they're they have something like clairalliance, which is picking up information through smell and so on. So those are just different versions. It's like saying, hey, I'm psychically seeing somebody, I'm psychically hearing somebody, I'm psychically smelling them, and so on. It's really, they're fancy words, but we often use the term clairvoyance. And then there's remote viewing, or the greater term is remote perception, because not all remote viewers get visuals. They sometimes get auditory stuff. They will hear, they'll smell, they'll feel the temperature of the place that they're viewing. It is a form of real-time clairvoyance or real-time ESP, unless they're picking up what's going to happen in the future. Then it'll come to our next slide, precognition. But the fact is that if I hear and see psychics using the term, not just psychics, also fellow mentalists using the term remote viewing in really bizarre ways. So if I have an envelope and I say to you, somebody put something in this envelope, and I'm going to use remote viewing to pick up what's in the envelope. Viewing might be true, but remote is not. So remote perception, remote viewing requires some distance between the target and the viewer, between the target and the psychic. So if psychic says, I'm remote viewing you, and you're sitting in front of them, just say to them, what is it about our distance that is remote? Psychics and mediums, different. Again, I'll get to that. So precognition is information through time without the use of the normal senses. It is without logical inference. It is without data forecasting. It is picking up information from a probable or likely future, not necessarily a definite future. We don't see the future as definitive as set in stone. It can come through to people in their dreams. It can be a feeling. It can be visions. It can be the sense of familiarity, deja vu. You could hear something that relates to the future or pick up things in other ways that seem to be the future. And of course, when people go to see psychics, they want to know the future. And then they get upset when the future changes or the predictions are not accurate. One thing I want to just mention, and this is, of course, one of the major criticisms of skeptics, or the pseudo-skeptics, I should say, the disbelievers, is that psychics are never accurate about the future. That's actually not true. They are sometimes accurate about the future. But the thing about that is that the future can shift. What happens in the future based on human decision-making and information. And here's an analogy. We, every day, well, not every day, but most days, if we're going to go outside, go someplace, we often check with an oracle. And the oracle tells us not only what it is right now outside, but what it's going to be like for the rest of the day. Those folks are called meteorologists, or just the weather people on television. And meteorology is a physical science, and yet cannot accurately predict the future. They're using models of weather and other influences that might affect the weather to forecast what's going to happen. But there can be unseen influences in the weather that change, it gets set the dominoes going in a different direction. It's fairly easy to forecast what's going to happen in the next couple of hours in the weather. Not always accurate. Same thing with psychics. The closer in time the prediction is to when the event is that they're predicting, the more likely they are going to be right. If a psychic tells you something that's about to happen to you, and let's say it's going to happen the next day when you go to work, and you decide, well, wait a minute, I'm going to use that information. I'm going to do something different. Now it doesn't come true because you have made different choices than what the psychic perceived from you. The mediums communicating with spirits, especially those coming from the other side, rarely ever get into predicting the future, partly because it's not set in stone and partly because that's not what spirits do. I mean, you can talk to ghosts and find out if they can tell you the future, but they're going to be guessing as much as you would. Psychokinesis, which some psychics can do, and there's variations of this, covers the gamut of healing to extraordinary human performance to telekinesis or movement of objects, metal bending. Yes, there have been people who have reportedly been able to affect the weather on a very local basis. One of the more common expressions of PK is human-machine interactions or affecting electronic devices. And that does, in fact, include EVP, instrumental transcommunication, photos and video, all of that. That is the effect of consciousness on a device or a recording medium. So whether it's a spirit affecting that device or a living person affecting that device, it's still psychokinesis. If a ghost moves something, they don't have a body, that's still psychokinesis. Some folks with PK have been able to affect energetic systems, energy systems, chemical processes. Psychic attack is the opposite of psychic healing. That's a whole different topic I'm not going to get into tonight, but just know that most people in the psychic world know that just like when you are going to a healer, if your attitude as the patient is that I don't believe I'm going to get healed, the odds are you're not. That effect of the best psychic healer may be nil, not at all. Works the same way with psychic attack. I'm never afraid of anything paranormal because I'm alive and I have technically more power.
We do have a quick question, Loyd.
Sure.
It comes from A. Miller. Hello, are you a psychic or medium? What qualifies someone to deem another a psychic or medium? This isn't a science or art you can study in a formal college or university like psychology or medicine.
So, or even art for that matter. Some people have a talent, have predilections. I'm neither a psychic nor a medium. I am not either one of those. I've had psychic experiences like most people have, but I work with psychics and I've worked with them for, at this point, it's over 45 years at this point. I've been working with mediums for quite a long time as well. So observing, looking at the research, and there's been research on this going back over 140 years in our literature. there's a huge amount of information. We know a lot about the behavior and what constitutes being psychic. But when it comes right down to it, if we're talking about someone doing psychokinesis, if we wanted to test somebody, we have to do it under a circumstance where we control all the physical variables and they have to try to affect something. Okay. If it is with a regular psychic or psychic who picks up information or a medium, we have to set up circumstances for testing them where they can't possibly know the answer to the questions. They can't possibly get the information. And that's the same thing. I'm going to talk more about that when you go to get a reading, how important that piece of it is if you want to determine if the person has control over their psychic abilities. That's a very important thing to consider. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are colleges. There's the College of Psychic Studies in the UK. There's the Arthur Findlay School for Mediumship. There are people who do teach psychic development. So while you can't get a degree in it, it's one of those things like it's psychic when you see it and you eliminate all the other possibilities, just like it's art. If you'll know if it's good art or bad art, and your opinion may matter for that.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So some folks who can do psychokinesis around the world in different cultures, there have been people, shamans and others who have been using psychic ability to try to affect plants and crops. And of course, a poltergeist case is physical activity. That's the way we define it in parapsychology. It is all about recurrent, spontaneous, so uncontrolled psychokinesis coming from a living person, not from a spirit, because we separate that out. If you have a case with an apparition, a ghost who is moving things, who has learned to do that, that is a feature of that apparition. It's not the whole case. The third area, survival of bodily death, we look at experiences people have that suggest survival of consciousness after death, like out-of-body experiences, which often are part of near-death experiences. We look at cases of reincarnation, specifically children who remember previous lives, and we're talking kids between 2 and 4 years old, because they have not been contaminated by too much information in the back of their mind, you might say. And then we look at the idea of mediumship, which is communication between a living person, that's the medium, is communicating with you, the client, and they are the intermediary between you, the client, and the spirit world or a spirit. So they're in between. So mediumship is a very specific situation or ability of psychic ability to communicate with non-embodied consciousness. Channeling is a bigger term that in the 1980s was very popular, and there were people all over the place who were going into trance and saying that they were channeling aliens and multi-thousand-year-old Atlanteans and Lemurians and aliens on the Earth, as well as aliens in space and other dimensionals, most of which was unprovable, even unverifiable information. You could not get an ID from a channeled entity like an alien, whereas a medium can get enough information about an individual who's passed away to identify that person. The idea of possession would be technically a form of channeling, but as one medium put it, possession in Western culture, that term is usually used for someone who is taken over forcibly, as opposed to a trance medium who goes into trance and allows a spirit to come in or something else to come into them. That's consensual in that sense. The term possession, by the way, in anthropology refers to all of that. It refers to channeling, mediumship, any situation where a person goes into altered state and allows another entity to come in. That's technically possession. Again, that's the anthropological perspective. And we look at evidence for apparitions, or what we call discarnate entities, the idea of someone surviving the death of their body and stick it around in our physical universe, our physical world, before they move on to wherever it is they go. So when you're going to talk about psychics and mediums, and you want to consult with one, you have to think about why. Is it a personal reason? You have some personal questions, usually I'll get to some of those topics in a moment, but it could be relationship, for example. It could be something else, your health. Is it for business? And business people do consult with psychics quite often, have been doing this for a long time. Politicians have consulted with psychics for a very long time. Or do you want to consult with a psychic to see if they're really psychic or a medium to bring into your investigations or research? If you were a laboratory researcher or a field researcher, a paranormal investigator, I'll try to touch on all of these things. But you want to ask the why, because a lot of times the why is for entertainment. And that is one of the best reasons to see a psychic, because it doesn't matter if they are genuine or a phony, as long as they're entertaining. So the personal, these are kind of some of the categories that typically come up: love, relationships, family, grief. It could be trying to connect with the living, with the dead. It could be your own health issues or someone else's. It could be related to your work, your career, decisions you want to make. It could be specifically about money, investments, and things like that, or the future in general. What's going to happen to me? For business, again, executives and others continue to consult with intuitive consultants. Intuition was the term that started popping up in the late 60s, early 70s in the business world. That way, an executive who was going to pay a psychic or someone else could actually work with an intuitive, because technically intuition is not the same as being psychic. And this was a nice cover term, because the term psychic has a lot of bias. It could be for decision making, again, for investing. There's a group of folks who have been doing remote viewing, and they have actually been using it for investment and making money. They're not doing big stuff. They're doing kind of slow burn as partly a research project too. Productivity, personnel, along with business, I'll mention in law, sometimes psychics have been brought into, as well as folks who do nonverbal communication, to judge jury members, whether the jury member is going to go one way or the other with the particular case. So product, sometimes psychics are brought in for determining the best way to market a product. There might be career issues, and then just general direction of business for that. For field investigations and research, many of us in parapsychology have worked with psychics and mediums, and I routinely do. I don't always have the same folks accessible to me. I was working for many years with a psychic medium named Annette Martin here in the Bay Area, who sadly passed away in 2011. But I was working with her since the mid-1990s, and for a number of reasons. And I'm going to talk about some of the things I learned working with her, working with other psychics and mediums over the years, specifically in investigations. In research, when we bring in psychics or mediums into research, there may be different purposes for that research. For example, there is research going on today, and has been for several years, looking at what's going on in the brain of a medium in the different conditions of communication. So are there different brain states when a medium is having a conversation with the researcher, when the medium is being asked to pretend or imagine they are speaking to a spirit, but they're not really doing it the way that they would normally do it, or when they go into whatever state it is to communicate with the spirits and they start having that communication. All of those states are different. So there's something different going on in the brain for each of those conditions, which suggests at least that if you don't believe in mediumship, that the person does, and that their brains are reacting differently. So it's truly a way of saying this person's not a phony from the perspective of they're not trying to fake somebody out. That's one form of research. The other form of research for mediums and for psychics is, can they get good information? Is the information something that this person doesn't know? And we set up situations for that. Is this information that no one knows, and we have to then go verify? And that is something that does happen. There, of course, was the 22 plus year research program called eventually, which became known as the Stargate program for the US government, working with mainly military personnel and a few others who were trained, who had the kind of a psychic capacity to be trained in remote viewing, who did work with government agencies repeatedly. And no matter what the skeptics say, here's a statistic for you. 19 government agencies came to the Stargate program, remote viewers, with missions or tasks or requests. 17 of those agencies came back repeatedly. Why would 17 agencies come back repeatedly to remote viewers if they weren't getting something out of it? And that's a statistic directly from Ed May, who was the program director from late 85 through the closure of the program in 1995. And Ed was the lead author on a book that I co-authored called ESP Wars, East and West, which also talks about the Russian programs. So psychics can be used in research in various ways. Psychics are useful certainly for field investigations to gain insight into what may be going on in the case, even if there's not a supposed ghost there. Psychics have different talents.
Okay. We do have another quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. It's again from A. Miller. Why are you passionately involved in parapsychology? I find it as fascinating. People like you are heavily involved in this field of study, yet don't use the title psychic or medium or clairvoyant.
Well, if I was studying art, I would not call myself an artist. If I was studying music, I would not call myself a musician. The term psychic is a practitioner. The term medium is a practitioner. I'm not a practitioner of psychic ability. We study that ability. I'm passionate about it and have been since I really got into it as a kid, because it's a really, there's two reasons. One, it's a mystery that still needs to be solved. And unfortunately, there's just, the sad part is there's not enough effort being put into understanding what these abilities are, what these experiences are, what the phenomena is, which millions of people have experienced something psychic or paranormal, and back through time, of course, as well. So it's a common human experience. It's actually not paranormal. It's normal. It's a rare, perhaps, but it's not an abnormal or paranormal experience or phenomena we're dealing with here, just unexplained. The second thing is, it says a lot about human beings and our potential. And as someone who grew up on comic books and science fiction, this is the one area where humans really have extraordinary potential. So that's what keeps me going.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
So if you're looking for a good psychic, there's no really one good way to do this. It depends on the kind of person you're looking for. But here's a bunch of ways you can find out. Word of mouth is a good way. So personal recommendations from research centers or organizations like the Forever Family Foundation. We actually have a list on our website of the mediums who have gone through testing and have passed the testing. And by the way, less than 10% of the folks presenting themselves for our testing actually pass the tests. That's how stringent they are. Maybe it's a famous person, and there's a lot of folks who have been talking about the individual. But just so you know, fame can go to the psychic or medium's head. And I won't say that they lose their abilities, but they might get lazy about what they're doing. And that's happened a number of times as well. So that's word of mouth. There's psychic fairs. You can start there. I can't say that everybody at a psychic fair is going to be psychic. In fact, most people are not. But you might run into someone who can provide enough information about you that's specific, if you sit down with them, that you might want to check them out a little further. There's social media. Again, people are unfortunately promoting themselves all over the place, so you have to be very discerning for that. There could be advertisements. You see someone, but you would then do web searches or other searches or try to get some sort of backup to what you've learned about that psychic or medium from the initial advertisement or social media. But you want to consider what type of psychic or medium you want to consult, because you need to know what abilities they claim to possess. Going to see a medium for information about your future does not make sense. Some mediums are capable of doing readings of living people, and that person might be able to give a reading for you about the future. But most psychics, again, reading the future, which is one major reason people go to see psychics, is not necessarily something you're going to get a good outcome. You'll get advice about how to handle things, but just again, know that that prediction, that information may not be true because you've done different things for that. So the what abilities they claim, very important. So let's talk about that after I get to talk about the different kinds of terms you might find. So psychic, intuitive. Again, folks who call themselves intuitive consultants are often doing that for to try to tamp down any sort of bias against calling themselves a psychic. There are those who call themselves medical intuitives, and if they're genuinely a medical intuitive, they are someone who, think of it as a scanner. They can scan your body, and preferably they are either going to work with a doctor or you're going to take that information and go to your doctor. And they will tell you that something where, if you're feeling bad, what's going on, like what part of your body, what's going on, what kinds of tests you want. As an example, a research medium, a psychic medium we had by the name of Alex Tanis at the American Society for Psychical Research in New York. He mainly did work, the research work was mainly about out-of-body experiences, but he was also a medical intuitive, and he was consulted heavily by doctors at a local hospital in New York City when they were stuck, when they were to a point where they would have to do like the full battery of tests, and the individual, and they really didn't want to put the individual through that. Alex would be brought in just to do a little scan and say, hey, start with the kidneys, start with their liver, start with they have stomach issues, start with something else. And the doctor would start there. They would not necessarily finish the testing there, but that would inevitably be where the initial diagnosis would end up. Annette Martin could do that. She was actually working with a doctor down in San Jose who was studying her ability to do this. And the thing to remember is that it's rare for a medical intuitive to have medical training. Barry Taff, who's a name that may be familiar to everybody in doing paranormal investigations, also is a medical intuitive, and he's had medical training. So he has a little bit better idea, but he doesn't rely on that. They call themselves clairvoyants. In fact, the term clairvoyant was used heavily from the late 1800s through about the first halfway mark of the 20th century. That was the term for a psychic or medium, for that matter. People would call themselves clairvoyants. Precog, somebody who can predict the future. You'll see that in science fiction. Spirit communicator is another word for medium, of course. Maybe there's someone who's a diviner or oracle, and that occurs more often in anthropology literature. People call themselves a psychic empath. They pick up emotions specifically. Hopefully, we all have a form of empathy for others. There's a past life reader, somebody who specializes in telling you what your past life was unprovably. It may make you feel better, but there's no way to actually research that specifically and point to that. They could be tarot or other kinds of readers. They could be animal communicators or psychics. I do have a hard time sometimes with psychics who are pet psychics, and they're telling me word for word what a dog is thinking. I'd rather hear conceptual stuff than that. It's all being filtered through their own head. So even if they are communicating or picking something up, they're interpreting that. People call themselves angel communicators. I would ask them, what does that mean? And then the question is, do you believe in angels? And then there's channelers. But the question for all of these, are they actually psychic? Here are some claims that people have had. I make predictions that are 95% accurate. I help the police solve crimes. By the way, no psychic solves crimes. Psychics can give information that allow the police to solve crimes. The psychics who work with police often don't talk about it because they're asked not to. And many psychics have helped police significantly in pinning down who to focus on or where the evidence is. Because remember, police still have to build a case in solving that crime. Psychic healers are out there. Psychics claim to be able to end curses. We're going to get to that one. They can change your energy. That's as much you as them, if not more you than them. There's that animal telepathy. There might be PK-related claims of other sorts. And there are a lot of psychic phonies doing PK stuff. Dowsers may or may not be psychic. Dowsing may be not really a psychic ability. It's a real interesting thing. It's because one of the suggestions is for finding wells, like say buried underground water or minerals, may actually be more about connecting with the Earth's magnetic field biologically than it is about being psychic. There's remote viewing, spirit communication, spirit releasement. And there's a form of therapy called spirit releasement therapy, which refers to spirit attachment, which is a whole different thing than possession in general. There's knowing people's past or future lives. Again, that can be complete fantasy. Knowing what's best for people, being certified or tested, something very important that we'll get to. And then that last point, claiming accuracy to a specified percent of the time. This is something that we see psychics on TV do all the time. I've heard psychics say that I'm 85% accurate, 95% accurate. There was a well-known psychic who used to be on Montel Williams and other shows who talk about being 99 or 100% accurate. And clearly she was not, because she kept continually making predictions that publicly were not true. But the big important thing, if someone claims to be accurate to a certain point, ask them how they figure that out. Because the only way you can come up with a percentage is if every single statement you made was actually checked for accuracy. And if it has to do with the future, that's impossible. No one follows up on a 5-year prediction or a 30-year prediction for their clients. They would have to do that to include that in their statistics. What often happens, though, as I found, is that they're doing it because they saw other psychics doing it on TV or on the web. It sounds good in marketing. It's really for marketing purposes. Or they will admit that, 85% of my clients come back to me again and again. That's customer satisfaction. Actually, that's a good stat. I'd rather hear that from a psychic. Mediumship is about spirit communication. And there are different terms for them. The one you're probably going to see most often is psychic medium, because mediums recognize that mediumship is a psychic ability. If they go into an altered state, a deep altered state, especially if they're letting a spirit speak through them, that's often called trance mediumship. But all three of these are mental mediums, getting information mind to mind, whereas physical mediumship represents a long-standing tradition in both spiritualism and fraud of contacting spirits, let a spirit come in, and then having all sorts of physical things happening in the room. Most physical mediums since at least the 1920s, and probably actually since the very early 20th century, work in the dark. And modern physical mediums do that. It's impossible for us to do real research with them for that reason. And there is fraud in many circumstances. Maybe not all, but still in many of them. The term evidential medium represents the idea that mediums who are called evidential come up with factual and personality and other kinds of information that is absolutely verifiable. And this is an important thing because we want to verify information from a psychic or medium before we can say, yeah, they really have some ability. And that's versus channeling, because channelers, again, there was no way to know that the person or the entity supposedly speaking through the channeler was in fact that individual, alien, dead person, no matter what. And the information very often was not directed at anything but, kind of more psychological advice, just general advice. Communication and physical mediumship almost never has evidential information in it. It's more about talking about the spirit world. The adage we have is all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. Because mediumship is a specific form of psychic ability that not all psychics can do or have. So technically, a medium is a psychic, but they tend to use the word psychic in reference to living people, picking up info from living people. Now, divination is very old, thousands of years old, using tools to read the future, to find things. The Laplanders in Finland for many, many years were using, for centuries, were actually getting a caribou bone and taking it to the equivalent of a shaman in the group because they wanted to do some hunting for caribou. They threw the caribou thigh bone into a fire. It would be retrieved, and reading the cracks, the shaman would tell the hunters where to go, where to find the caribou herd if it's kind of off its normal path of migration. So there are all sorts of tools, hundreds of tools for reading the future, for finding out where things are right now, for reading people. Two of the most common are tarot and runes. Of course, palm reading is very, very common, usually for personality readings. Numerology is fairly common. People do aura readings. Tarot, you can see some tarot card decks behind me. I actually have dozens of different tarot card decks and oracle decks of other types as well. So there are all sorts of things that are out there. And there are plenty of books on divination about that. But the question is, are the cards doing it, or is the psychic doing it? Here are some more. Scrying, which means looking into a crystal ball or a bowl of water or into a mirror. Gemstone reading, tea leaves, coffee grounds, very, very old. Reading the movement of pendulums. Analyzing dreams to review the future of what's going on in somebody's life. The I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese system. Geomancy, reading the earth itself. Bibliomancy, someone takes a book off a shelf, flips it open, points to a paragraph, and then the diviner would look at the paragraph that the client pointed at, read that paragraph, and from what the paragraph says, would do a reading. There are spirit boards like Ouija boards and other kinds of boards. There's phrenology, which is reading the bumps on somebody's head. Very common for fortune tellers, but less common for psychics and mediums, but they're less common in general. So what we see with divination is somebody reading tarot cards. Number one, too many people, what they do is they memorize the meanings of the cards, and it's basically random chance. If they've shuffled the cards and people have drawn cards, it's random chance what cards come up. And then it's the interpretation based on typically the meanings in most of those tarot card books. That's lazy in some respects. The actual interpretation of use of tarot cards is to use the images on the tarot card to inspire the practitioner, the tarot reader, to get what that means for the individual client. But there is a random chance, there is synchronicity, kind of meaningful coincidence that comes in. Tarot has, and most of these divinatory techniques, when you look at the meanings of things, there are generalizations, there is self-fulfilling prophecy. It may be that the reader is, without even realizing it, precognitive, picking up information from the future psychically, and may even psychokinetically be affecting how the dice roll so that the right numbers come up. The tools themselves can be a focus or focal points for ESP, kind of something that triggers the individual psychic ability. And there have been studies that show that some people who seem to be psychic can use divinatory practices as the focus for being psychic, for their ESP, their non-sensory perception, whether it's real time, picking up a reading, something from you or from the future, potentially, a probable future, I might say. But the question when you're dealing with people who do divining, so you got a tarot card reader. One of the reasons why talented people might use tarot cards, so real psychics, people who have psychic ability might use them, is because if they get bad news or picking up something negative, they can always say, it's not me, it's the cards. It becomes a scapegoat. It's a way of separating themselves from the ability, which could cause people to feel a little uncomfortable sometimes. It's the cards. It's the rune stones. It's what's in your palm. It's what the stars say. So it's important to find out, if they're using these techniques, where's the power? And phonies use those things because it's easy to come up with a good reading. I mean, honestly, it's very easy to come up with a good reading using any divinatory technique, for that matter. And that doesn't mean the readings are bad. It just means they're not psychic. So one of the things that you want to consider before you see a psychic, and you should find out if you can do this, can I interview or ask you some questions? If they say no, and sometimes it's because they're too busy, I understand that, but you should be able to put some questions to the person to clarify what their claimed abilities are if it's not on their website. Psychics and mediums put on their websites what they can and cannot do. And again, I would ask them about their success rate in history and see if they come up with that I'm 95% accurate thing, because that raises questions, even more questions. You should listen carefully to whatever questions that you've asked, whatever the answers are. Then ask for clarification if they're using terms or statements that are not clearly understandable by you. A lot of folks who are psychic practitioners use New Age language and terms. They'll use terms like a variety of terms that have multiple meanings. I need to know what that actually means. What does that mean to you? So, for example, the word spiritual. Years ago, when I was teaching at John F. Kennedy University, we had a School of Consciousness Studies at that point, and originally it was in the parapsychology department. And I had a class bringing anthropology in. And I asked my 25 students to write down what the word spiritual meant to them and to read it out loud after we went through the whole 25. And, I didn't get 25 different definitions, but I got about 10. And it was really interesting to see the looks that they gave each other, because they're all using this term spiritual and they don't mean the same thing. So terms don't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone, especially terms in the psychic world. That's important. And you want clarification. You always should ask for definitions for that. So, what psychic abilities do you have? And how do you know? If the practitioner is not clear or uses words that have no real meaning to you, for you, can you explain what spiritual means in plain terms? Can you give me an example? Do you use any divinatory practices or tools? If so, then ask, where's the power? If the tools have the power, what's your role? And they probably will say, I interpret what's there. To which point you can say, can't I interpret what's there? Because if they're interpreting, are they interpreting because they're psychic, or are they interpreting just like you could? Ask them what a typical client session's like, how your abilities come out in the typical session. I mean, what happens? A friend of mine in New York, a guy named Nick Bell, just did an interview recently we posted on paranormaldailynews.com, which is a great site. And he grew up having both psychic and mediumistic abilities. And I asked him what's going on in a typical session. And he said, sometimes, I'm trying to do a psychic reading of somebody, getting information from them, the information around them. But every once in a while, one of their relatives comes through, and I'll include that. So he's got spontaneous stuff happening both ways. He described his typical session pretty well. Again, that accuracy hit rate. How do you measure your success rate? That's important. Again, how have you applied your abilities besides doing readings or spirit communication sessions? And how is that? Give me some examples. Because psychics don't just do readings. Psychics may have other applications of that. If they make claims, if they just say, I do investigations. Now, people who are ghost hunters or in paranormal investigations might immediately assume that that means they go out to haunted places. That is not necessarily the case. The word investigation can mean multiple things. Ask them what kind of investigations. If it's about police work, ask them for more information. There have been psychics who in the media who have claimed to take credit for solving cases. And the police will then typically almost always deny that happened. In fact, what could have happened sometimes, and again, they didn't solve the case. They might have picked up information that was valuable to solving the case, but they didn't solve the case. So what sometimes does happen, and I know this from talking to law enforcement, is that the psychic may have actually called it the tip line. And on the tip line said, I am a psychic. I can definitely tell you who committed this crime. There are potentially hundreds, if not thousands of people calling that tip line. And typically the detectives may not have even gotten to all the calls. So they might not have been actually heard or even gotten the information that was called into the tip line by the psychic. And they may be biased about anybody who calls themselves a psychic when they call a tip line. So it may be that the psychic was right, but they had no part of the actual process. And then there are folks who actually have worked with police who can be verified, but there's ways that people do that. Different psychics work differently with police, different police work differently with psychics. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. If they claim to be part of the Stargate program, a government program, ask for specifics. I will tell you from having worked with Ed May for years and having written this book, ESP Wars East and West, that there have been a few people who have been, yes, attached to the Stargate program. One in particular I can think of who had told me came in for 3 months. He washed out. He was not good. So he was out of the program. He's out there as one of the leading people, remote viewers. And maybe he got better or maybe he didn't. But he's making these claims. There are people who've been associated with people who were associated with the program who claim to have been part of the Stargate program. So you got to find out what really is going on there. If they are claiming to work with ghost hunters or paranormal investigators, ask questions like who, what, when, where, and how. Have them describe how they worked. It's important because you need to know how they work. If they state that they've been tested or certified, make sure you get specifics at who that was, what was being tested, what being certified involved. Then contact that source. Quick story. After graduating from JFK University with a master's in parapsychology in 1981, I worked for the American Society for Psychical Research from 82 to 83. Got a call in our education department where I worked from a guy who was offering his services as a psychic. He'd just moved to New York from California. He's offering to be a psychic to help us wherever he can. And then he says, I was tested. I'm certified as a psychic. So there you go. I said, well, where were you, who certified you? Where were you tested? John F. Kennedy University. And I said, what was the test? And he starts describing it. And it turned out he was one of the volunteers in my master's study experiment, which was absolutely not designed to tell anyone that they were psychic, certainly not designed to certify anybody. And I told him if we ever heard his name again, and that was he was claiming, I'm going to out him to the media. So he just kind of never heard from him again. So definitely check those things. For mediums, how do you make contact with spirits? How do you make contact with the spirits I want to talk to? Can you even talk to? So I want to talk to my deceased father. How do you make contact with him? And is he going to come through? How does the information come to you? How much of this is subject to your interpretation and personal biases? How do I know it's a spirit and not you doing a psychic reading of me? These are all things that a good medium would actually know. The one thing a medium would tell you up front in terms of that second question is it's not dial a spirit. So sometimes your father may not want to talk to you. All right. Review their websites, take a look at social media, do research to verify what claims you can, mainly about their history. Even before you do ask any questions, maybe you find some unusual stuff on the claims on their website, helpful to ask. Think about this as a background check. Ask them about money. How long? What do I get? And you got to decide if it's in your budget. I don't care how famous the person is. If they're charging $800, they may be the best medium in the world. Can you actually afford that? And is it going to be worth your while? That's important. You can ask them questions like, how often do you see the same client? And by the way, any good psychic will tell you that if they ask you to come back the following week, that's one thing. But if they ask you to come back week after week after week, this is not a therapist. You're not paying for therapy. It might be therapeutic, but you're not paying for therapy. You should not get stuck in the routine of seeing a psychic for every decision you have to make. That is not appropriate. They should be giving you your power back in that sense. Most of the mediums and psychics I know, the mediums certainly aren't going to see somebody more than once every quarter, if not even once every 6 months. They don't want people to be hooked on them, even though it's good money. And then where's it going to be? Location, logistically. All right. For yourself, you're going into the reading or meeting. Get ready for it. Again, think about the purpose of your visit. It could be, this is not counting the pre-work for research and interviewing for investigation. But what's the purpose if you're going for a reading? What do you see as a successful outcome of your visit? And think about what areas you want to focus on. And by the way, don't just walk in and say, they say, what would you like to focus on today? Well, you're the psychic. You tell me. Don't do that. If you want a good reading, tell them what area of your life or the issue you want to focus on. Think about what questions you might want to ask while you're there, since the original interview or whatever. Make sure you have a voice recorder, have that app on your phone. You are definitely going to want to record the meeting itself. Again, have some idea of success for you, what it looks like at the end of the meeting, of the reading or meeting, and then what's next. If you're auditioning them to work with somebody on investigations or research, this is only the first step. And the next step might be to take them out into the field and try them in a public place. Again, ask that question about accuracy when you're first there, what the practitioner, what they see as a success. So what does a psychic see as a successful reading? They should ask you that question. It's like, how was that? Ask, and you should ask follow-up questions. Make sure you ask for permission to record the session up front. Now, some psychics, like my friend Annette Martin, when she was around, she would ask, did you bring a recorder? And you say no. She had a recorder right there. She puts a cassette tape in. This is back in the pre-digital world. And she handed the cassette tape to you at the end. Many psychics are nervous about recordings. And that's because they don't want you to know what they actually did. What they actually did is listen to you, and maybe you responded to something with more information than you needed to when they gave you a statement, maybe about a family member. And you thought, oh, that must, with a medium, oh, the female, that must be my deceased grandmother. and you say more than that. And then 20 minutes later, they come up with this information about your deceased grandmother. And you're amazed because it's specific information and you've completely forgot that you said it before. So going over a recording or transcript, and remember, nowadays with recordings, you can upload the file into Word and have it transcribe that for you. So you can do that kind of thing and take a look and see whether or not you spoke too much, because that's a problem. You don't want to not say anything, but you also don't want to talk too much. You want to let them give that information to you, and whether or not they repeated it later on. If they won't let you record, ask them why. One excuse that was given by one psychic I heard about, well, because I had somebody who went to this really famous psychic, wouldn't let them record. And the psychic said, because my energy is so strong, it's going to break your device. And I feel really bad if that happened. Now, for me, if I was checking on a psychic and somebody said my device is going to break if the psychic is because of your energy, I'd say I'm taking that chance. Because if my device breaks, you're definitely psychic. Maybe not the right way, but you definitely are. So, that's the time to get up and leave. Hopefully you haven't paid yet. Do be open to sharing your goals, the topics you want for the reading before the practitioner starts. If you're an investigator, share your goals, the issues for an assessment reading, what you're looking for in a psychic or medium to work with in investigations, and here's why we need you. Does that fit what you can do? That's important as well. You walk into their office, the site, you're looking at their background. Take a look at my background right now. Or if you can see it right now, I'm not sure if there's a little window for me, but I'll come back on later on. I have not only books, I have tarot cards, I have a lot of toys and things like that. Is the office set up like a New Age store? Mystical, occult, New Agey. Annette Martin had a bookcase with a lot of crystals, like rock crystals and things, because people gave them to her. I asked her about them. I used to be interested in geology as a kid. I still have some crystal formations, which are really pretty. And people would give her those thinking that was a psychic thing. They weren't, but they were pretty. So she put them on a shelf. She did not have any window dressing. She did tell me that sometimes people would ask her, where are your cards? And she would have to explain to them again, because she did that in the initial call, that she doesn't work that way. Other psychics will roll their eyes, pull out a tarot deck, not do a tarot reading, but spread some cards and still do the psychic reading. So it's just window dressing. You have to think about the belief system and what tools are going to be used. And are these different than what they told you initially? Again, record the session. Listen carefully to what their instructions and statements are up front. Listen carefully. In other words, listen consciously, attentively to what's said. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Respond when asked, but also note your responses. Again, you've got a recording going, so you can go back over it later on. Don't volunteer information other than confirming or denying. Or if there's a direct question, like what you want to focus on, or is your father's name Richard? Was he known by another name? And you can always say yes or no, and just say, can you tell me, are you picking that up from him? Don't feel compelled to offer information, to fill in blanks, to continue talking. I've taught and coached people on public speaking and doing media interviews. And one of the tricks of an interviewer is you answer a question and the interviewer silently looks at you and expectingly like you're going to talk more. And most people don't shut up. They keep talking and sometimes get themselves in trouble. Don't try to force matches for any partial or non-specific information. Just take note for later. And by the way, besides that recorder, you might have a notepad to make note of some things you need to check later too. During the reading for assessments, again, is the practitioner making new and different claims about their abilities, their success rate, their accuracy. Maybe they forgot what they told you on the phone, different than their website. Do they go over the process again? So you really do want that upfront introductory, here's how I work. Here's where you can speak up. Does the practitioner explain how the information comes? That's not always that important, but you might want to ask, is it filtered by their own information? How is it delivered to you, or how are they giving it to you? Now, for mediums, for example, some will talk about how they are interpreting. Well, John Edward, who's a well-known medium, will say sometimes they're doing charades. They're trying to showing a symbol, or they're acting something out. So effectively, he's interpreting. Think about how you might play charades. He's interpreting what they're giving him, if they're actually giving him something. So we filter. Mediums have information in their heads. They have their own internal processes. The information's coming in through their mind. So there's going to be filtration. There's going to be interpretation. All right, so think about that. If they're talking about the future, how do they describe the future and any predictions? Ask them, well, why would that prediction not come true? And they should probably know that it's because the future's not set in stone, and give you more information about that. Do you get a good vibe from the person? I can think of one TV medium again who used to be on Montel Williams, who was mean to people. She was very aggressive and very negative to people. And it's like, that personality is not somebody I'd want to see as a psychic, because technically, and this is a key thing, by the way, for me, working with psychics and mediums and investigations, do I want to be around this person? Not just during the investigation, but when we're sitting down for dinner or coffee or later on, or at a party, do I want to be around this person? Does the practitioner sometimes seem too new agey? In other words, is being psychic or a medium their entire life? That's not the case with any of the Forever Family Foundation mediums, or any of the psychics I've worked with. There's a very famous psychic medium by the name of Eileen Garrett. She's wrote a lot of books back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, started the Parapsychology Foundation, used her money for education in parapsychology. She often would tell people to be down to earth, have your feet on the ground. In other words, before you leave your body, make sure your feet are planted firmly on the ground. So you need to be connected to the real world. Do they ask what topic you want to target? I'm suspicious if they don't, honestly. Does the medium ask who you want to connect with and explain the person may not come through? And by the way, sometimes mediums get very negative reviews on Yelp and other places and feedback, because the individual went in to talk to their deceased mother and their father came through. And during the process, the client absolutely positively believed it was their father, but that's not who they wanted to talk to. So they gave a negative review. This is like calling somebody's house on a landline, by the way. You're calling a friend's family home, and there could be 3 people or 4 people at the house. You want to talk to a friend of yours, not their parents or not their kids. And the person who picks up the phone says, I'm sorry, Dave's not here. In fact, I'm the only person here right now. Do you want to talk? That's what happens. It's something that should be explained to you. Does the practitioner ask what the goal for the reading is? Now, not every medium will ask you what the goal is, but some mediums will actually say, why are you here? Not just to who you want to talk to, but why are you here? Because they want to help you understand how what they're getting relates to what your goal is. During the session, again, try to be open to the person actually being psychic, even if you're incredibly skeptical. Don't be so emotionally and mentally closed off. We'd call that psychically shielded, if psychic ability really exists. The practitioner can't possibly pick up anything from you, not even nonverbal communication. People hold themselves so stiffly that it's like even the best person who does nonverbal assessment, that's not a psychic ability, by the way, that's a learned ability, couldn't tell what you're thinking or doing. Pay attention to your own reactions. That's what the practitioner says. It may not be about saying anything. It could be that your jaw dropped because it was such an amazing statement. But definitely pay attention to your verbal responses. Again, that's the main reason for the recording rather. Don't try to hold your tongue. Don't try to hold yourself as stiffly as possible. Just be aware of how you're reacting. Now, the best research that's going on with mediumship these days, which has been done at the Windbridge Research Center by Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark McCuzzy. They spent a year's worth of testing and training with mediums that they ended up passing 20 mediums under a particular condition called research mediums. So the research certified mediums that are on windbridge.org are also useful to connect with. And these folks are tasked with doing readings under highly controlled conditions where they get a pool. The researchers have a pool of potential clients or sitters, and there are new ones added all the time because people die in their lives quite often. They get volunteers. They ask those folks to fill out a survey form about the individual they want to communicate with and possibly other deceased relatives. And that is held at the research center. There's a medium randomly chosen or selected to be the one doing the reading. Now, let's say that the client's name is Sally, and Sally's grandmother has passed away, and Sally's in her 30s. And Sally's grandmother, therefore, would be in a certain age group. Okay. So the medium is told that they are going to be doing a reading for a sitter on a particular day and time. They're going to be on the phone with a researcher, not the one who has any knowledge of who Sally is or the survey. So this is a researcher who doesn't know anything more than one thing, the name Sally. That Sally wants to talk to a relative right now. Sally is told when that's going to happen. Sally is supposed to think about her relative at that time. The medium is on the phone, has Sally's name. That's all she has. The medium does the reading. That is transcribed. It is reviewed for any general information, look for specifics. It is assessed by the researchers. It is then added to I think it's 3 or 4 other readings of a grandmother for a person in their 30s rather. And then they're given to Sally to grade. And the idea is if Sally finds the reading that was about her grandmother and scores the individual statements a certain score, then that is evidential for that. But the medium gets no feedback.
We do have a quick question, Loyd,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. Yeah, Jerry's been commenting a lot, and I see a lot of your comments, Jerry, and don't worry about hijacking the comments. Do appreciate you interacting. She's been talking about how her and her family have had psychic abilities. But the one question she does have is, what about the Estes method?
Oh, the Estes method actually has significant flaws to it, I'm afraid. In fact, we can talk about that afterwards if you want to bring that back up.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start it and we'll bring it back up. And then Antone, which is one of our regular viewers, he says, how do you handle a situation when a reader gives information that contradicts previously researched or read information?
I guess it would depend on what kind of information you're talking about. I think that it's important to say, no, that's not accurate. If it's actually not accurate, just know that will happen. And there's a reason I'm going to get to actually here and why you might get some other information that might still be true, but might be not related to you or contradictory to other things you've heard. But if you've researched stuff and you're getting contradictory information, then it's possible, very possible, that psychic is not connecting with you at all, or that psychic is just doing generalizations or just trying to fish for information. That's assuming that the information you got previously and researched, it didn't even have to come from a psychic, obviously. But you should be able to say on a specific bit of information, if somebody said to me about my father, my deceased father, something that I knew was not true, I would say that. That's not about my father. Maybe you're picking up somebody else. But try, as you're doing that, don't be confrontational. Just say, that really, I've done research on this, or I've confirmed this information with my family, something about that. And that does not fit. You may be picking up someone else. And I usually say that I put it back on them. Okay. Try to be friendly and personable. You want them to be successful, of course. Again, be open to success. You want them to be genuine, if possible. You want the reader to be friendly as well. So again, think about, is it happening as it was described? Is the information clear? If it's not clear, can you ask for clarity? If it seems too general, ask for something more specific. That's important. All right. So this is the thing you if you're in a reading and this happens, you get up and you leave the reading. I'm sorry, you may have already paid, but get up and leave the reading. Just leave. The one earmark, and granted, the person still might be psychic, because just because they're psychic doesn't mean they're a good person. They may still trying to get more money out of you. But this is the problem right off the bat. The C word. Somebody says you have a curse on you. There are other variations of that that are out there. That means they're going to hit you up for something to remove the curse, to remove evil spirits, to tell you how they can protect you against psychic attack. They'll tell you have a black aura or damaged aura. I can ensure your future goes the right way if you do X, Y, and Z. A lot of times they're going to want you to pay a couple $1,000s for a special blessed candle, or there's another one that I'm going to get to in a minute. But these are situations in which you need to get up and just say, thank you very much, and leave. Even if things have not been going well in your life, it's not because of a curse, unless you have somehow cursed yourself, you might say. There's something called the bujo. This comes from Romney lore, folklore, and it's kind of a classic curse or scam and removal. It's an old con game, and it's not used it's used by fortune tellers regardless of their backgrounds. It goes back at least a few centuries in variations, and essentially it runs like this. They tell you have a curse on you, or you've had bad luck in your house, in your home, or in your job, or maybe you're having problems in your relationship. They'll tell you have a curse on you. I can remove the curse. I want you to go home and take an egg, a white egg, carefully wrap it in a towel, put it under your pillow, and sleep on it, and then bring it back to me. Oh, by the way, that next reading is going to cost money. The person will then take the egg, crack it into a bowl, and there's something disgusting or red or something else in that egg, because that reader has now switched the egg for one that is prepared. Ooh, that's bad. I want you to withdraw $500 from your account, because money is the root of all evil. We're going to take care of this. If we can get rid of the money, we can get rid of the evil. And then they'll have you sleep on that. They'll have you wrap it up in a handkerchief. In fact, here's a special scarf or handkerchief I'd like you to wrap the money up in. Put the cash in the thing, sleep on it, bring it back to me. Hand me the handkerchief with money. They unwrap the handkerchief, and now there's only blank paper there, because the value of the money has disappeared, therefore the curse is gone. By the way, they, of course, switched. Little sleight of hand. There are many other ways to deal with this. It could be, again, a candle, some other items to deal with curses. They could sell you a talisman of some kind. Don't do it. If it's $5, it's one thing, but don't do it. Just get up and leave. They will be using psychological verbal suggestion, trying to induce some fear, make it even worse than it seemed for you, to get that money. And there have been people, I talked to a person years ago here in the Bay Area who was taken for $33,000 for doing more and more stuff to remove the curse that she was told she had on her because she was having bad luck. And then the person skipped town. And they could get nothing. Con artists are often escape the police in a lot of reasons, because it's very difficult to prosecute since you gave them money willingly. All right. Now, psychic information, is it psychic or not? Are there specifics or only generalities? Could the specifics even come from observation? Think about what you're wearing, your jewelry, how you react. Specifics can come from that too. People in the mentalism world, my world of magic, there are folks who specialize in doing readings, and some of them are actually better than psychics in describing you, the client, based on what you look like, how you're reacting, the clothes you're wearing, all sorts of things. This is often called cold reading, which is providing generalities and then looking for more specifics and fishing for information. But when you hear skeptics immediately say that the reading has to be cold reading, they don't actually know the ins and outs of cold reading. They know a very, very general, vague idea about that. You do have to consider that fraud may come through when it's just generalities. Then again, the psychic may be having an off day. They should know that. They should tell you that. And with fraud, especially with metal bending and other things, that's especially important to watch for with PK. All right, so somebody gets a psychic hit. Some things might be actually observational or intuitive, maybe even not consciously observed. Here's the thing. Somebody makes a statement to you, and you nod your head, actually nod your head without realizing it. I'd have to say that the psychic should not, whoever that is, psychic or not, if they're really psychic, they're not going to ignore that. If you make a face like a negative, they're going to assume that's a no because you didn't say no. They'll assume it's a no, and they'll go off in a different direction. That's an observational thing. Anyone doing any people interaction is going to consider that. That doesn't mean they're not psychic. That just means that's obvious. If it's a psychic hit, you have to confirm. That's great. A psychic hit should be something you can confirm. If it's irrelevant or you don't know, say so. If it's a miss, I worked with a psychic in the 80s who, in her preamble, would often say, she had gotten married a couple of years before. She had two very little kids. Sometimes she'd pick up or be distracted and pick up something from her husband or her kids. She actually picked up something from her kids while she's doing a reading of me, and then immediately said, wait a minute, that can't be you. She recognized it immediately. But sometimes people psychically pick up stuff that's related to other people they know or other things in their interests. They're not completely focused on you. Say so. If it's a miss in relation to you, it could be a miss in relation to you and be wrong because, it still may be psychic. You just don't know. And then cold reading is often something that happens unconsciously. It's not intentional. Somebody observes something about you, they make the statement. Salespeople do this all the time. That's not cold reading. That's something we pick up through nonverbal communication. It's part of human communication in general. Could be conscious fraud, though, because cold reading is possible. There's very intensive versions of cold reading where somebody can do a really good reading of you. All right, if it's the medium, are you getting factual information that fits the spirit this medium supposedly communicating with? Are these only facts that the medium could get by looking up the person online? Is it everything from their social media? Is that the only thing the medium's getting? Now, that doesn't mean it's not psychic or mediumistic, but that's not useful because you already know all that information, or you're not getting a sense that you're having a communication. So one of the things that I've observed in all the mediumistic readings that I've had a few personally, but also have spent a lot of time watching group readings and even individual readings from other people. There's a sense of personality, especially the sitter, the client feels, it's not intellectual. You feel that that medium is communicating with your father, your grandfather, your mother, whoever. You get a sense of that. And you can kind of get a sense that they're actually having a communication the same way sometimes you can tell when somebody's pretending to be on the phone, having a real phone call. You can kind of tell with certain people, with a lot of people, that they're faking it. So you need a sense of personality, and that personality should be from when they were alive. And the stuff that the medium comes through should not just be factual. When I say not factual, names, dates, and places are really important, especially if they're not things that are online anywhere. And that can definitely be the case. And the other thing is that they may come through with how the person behaves or other pieces of this, or some other sense of connection, some other connections or associations you have with the individual. A very young medium picked up something on, this was a situation where I was with two mediums while other things were going on for one of our grief retreats for Forever Family Foundation. And one of the mediums who I know very well and knows a bit about my history was trying to connect with a spirit that had supposedly played with the lights in the hotel meeting space the day before. And mentally, I was thinking of an individual who was a mentor of mine who had come through a few good mediums, unannounced. He had a very strong personality. And I thought about him, and she immediately looked at me and said, "Did you just call in, was it Martin. It was Marty, wasn't it? I knew you knew him. I said, yes. And she knew the last name of the guy. She didn't mention him. The other medium, who's young, 29 years old, Rebecca is describing things. And the fact that this happened just as I was thinking of him was pretty amazing. Rebecca then says, Marty wants to know why you keep calling him to do stuff. He's not a dancing monkey. Martin Caidin, that's his name. Look him up. Caidin, science and science fiction writer, could actually do psychokinesis and a very strong personality. In the meantime, the other medium says, I don't get it. This guy, bald, big mustache. And that started really describing, he's kind of a bulldog personality. Got that? Then he says, why am I seeing somebody running through sand? And Rebecca starts laughing, and I started laughing. And I said, I think it was Rebecca said, $6 million man. And Dustin says, who's that? What's that? Now, some of you may know the old TV show, The $6 Million Man. The opening sequence had Lee Majors as Steve Austin running through sand. That was from the first movie. Martin Caidin wrote the book Cyborg, which is the basis of The $6 Million Man, and was a consultant on the show. He also helped co-create the Bionic Woman later on. So that was a really interesting association, not knowing it was Martin Caidin, not knowing my history. And this was the first time I met this guy. Those kinds of things are very useful, very helpful. Helps you really kind of determine what's going on.
We have one more quick question.
Yeah, sure.
From A. Miller again. Do you think psychics or mediums should use their religious beliefs in their work? For example, claim Jesus told them what to say, or they're doing God's work.
Okay, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So I'm definitely going to get to that because that's an important question. All right, so do your assessment during the session. Again, listen to the recording afterwards. Hopefully you took some notes during the session as well. But consider this. For any psychic or medium, how useful or applicable is the information? What is the value? I mean, you paid money for this. Are you getting value out of this? Now, again, the value could be entertainment. That's value. Assess the value of what you got. Assess its usefulness, if it's applicable information, especially if we're talking about assessing a psychic for investigations. Are they providing useful information, applicable, practical information? If it's because you wanted to connect with someone who you knew who had passed away, or something emotional, is this useful emotionally for you? Then review everything, consider what might be psychic, what might not be psychic, and then think about whether this could have been done via fraud. But don't go too far out on a limb. It is not the case generally that a medium or psychic, knowing, maybe if they even ask for your credit card up front or getting your real name, it's not the case that they're going to do a lot of research. If they're really, really busy, especially if they've got some sort of waiting list, they're not going to do that. And the problem is if they get caught, their reputation goes down the tubes. But I've heard a lot of skeptics, so-called skeptics, accuse them of doing that when even controlled research. Oh, they must have known who that person was coming. It's like, no, we made sure that was not the case, and the person was randomly selected right before we brought them in. So draw your conclusions. Was it worth the money? Was it useful in some way? Again, even a phony might be useful in some way or even worth the money. All right, for an investigator, think about in the investigation setting or in a lab, if you're going to be doing research with the person, how are they going to actually work? You want to know about their personality and how they're going to work with people. I'm going to talk about characteristics. That's where the religion piece comes in here in a moment. But how does the information fit for doing investigations or for research? So let's talk about first the qualities of the best psychics and mediums that I found in here. I am going to talk a little bit about accuracy in that, but I've had a lot of psychics do readings for me or kind of tryouts. They wanted to do investigations, partly because they wanted some sort of credibility for other things. It was me or my colleagues or something else. And these are personality variables, you might say, or behavioral things that are really important if you expect to work with them. They also fit the better psychics who do readings for people. First, They should have a good ego. You absolutely need this for investigations. You do not need divas. And honestly, I've done kind of ride-alongs with a couple of ghost hunting groups, and the team sensitive in one instance, the moment the attention was diverted from the sensitive, she went, "Ah!" You know, all of a sudden her hands go up in the air and she's like calling everybody's attention back. I don't need somebody who's an intention suck. We want somebody who can help the investigation, and that's not helpful. Now, good ego means they are confident. They don't, believe that they're terrible at things. They have some good ego. But that also includes a sense of humor, and they should have a sense of humor, especially about themselves. Annette Martin absolutely had that. We often did a double bill where I would do comedy mentalism, mind reading and such, followed by Annette doing actual readings, a gallery reading. And at one of the ones we did at a haunted restaurant, two women walk up and say that they were psychics, and I'm standing next to Annette, and they look at Annette and said, "How can you work with this man? He makes fun of what you do, what we do." And Annette just looked at me and smiled and looked back at them and said, "Because I want to have fun, and because this is fun, and I'm not that serious about myself." Because people who are confident, who are mature, have a sense of humor about themselves. Some of my colleagues were in the 80s were upset about Ghostbusters until one of our luminaries, Charles Tart, made the comment as if one sure sign of maturity is being able to laugh at yourself. That's something to always remember. Good people skills, because they're going to work with you. They're going to work with clients in an investigation. Typically, they might be working with dead people, but certainly good people skills are for the living and the dead. They should have a genuine curiosity about the phenomena and their abilities. Now, that's not always the case. Not all. I've met a lot of psychics who are certain about their own abilities. They've gone through their curiosity period. They actually don't care what research says. They know what they can do, and they believe in themselves. The other side of that, which is interesting, is most mediums I've met and worked with are curious about what researchers say about them, and what researchers are learning about, like I said, the brain studies, all of that. They volunteer without question for doing research, because they're curious about how the abilities work and what they say about humanity, about all of this stuff. That one is not better than the other, but I find the genuine curiosity is always important. They are willing to learn from others. They don't set those expectations like I'm always going to get something, because that's not always the case. That's just not a human thing. They do not force their beliefs on others. So this goes to the religion question. It may be that a psychic or medium tells you up front that they believe that their abilities come from God. That's fine. But if everything that they're putting out to you in the reading is in that religious context, and you don't fit in that religious context, that's not going to be a useful reading for you. You're not going to get out of it what you really want. So it can help to find out what their beliefs might be or how they do that. That's the angel reader. I don't see any point of that, unless when they say angels, they mean a good spirit. So I would ask, what is an angel to you? Because if they're going with the biblical definition, that's their belief system. If that's your belief system, that's fine, but doesn't work for me. So be really clear about that when you're finding, and they should not be forcing their beliefs on the clients or on you, on the investigators themselves, if you're doing investigations, nor should you force your beliefs on them. Real psychics don't have that high accuracy claim. They know that things are going to be wrong, not only about the future, but just in general, because no psychic is 100%. No psychic can do all things. There are some polymaths who can do many things, but not all psychics can do everything. In fact, very few psychics can do more than a couple of things. They need to be people who play well with others, because you might have a ghost hunting team or investigations team, or they just need to play well with clients. They should be willing to be questioned by the clients in a reading. They should be willing to be questioned by you and other investigators in the investigation. Are you sure that applies to this case, or are you picking up something else? I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that it's psychic. Are you picking up from something else, somewhere else? Is that spirit that you're picking up somebody who might have come in with you or us, or is this the spirit that if there is a spirit here, the one that the people are seeing. I've seen it where minor questions are asked just to get more information from the psychic, and the psychic, because they're divas, blows up and has a problem. And again, they should be grounded in the real world. Most really good mediums may not have started out as mediums. I know one psychic I worked with for a number of years, spent 20 years in data analysis for Genentech. Really good psychic with a science background. Laura Lynn Jackson, one of the most famous mediums out there these days, and good friend of mine, was a teacher. And until, I guess you could say, she was discovered, or until she really kind of put her focus on doing mediumship for people. But she was an elementary school teacher. Think about their accuracy of the information, but more importantly, in some respects, is usefulness. Psychics don't always, who are in investigations, may not get a lot of accurate information that's provable, but they may give you a lot of practical information that is useful in the investigation or situation in that time. The same thing for a reading. There may not be a lot of of provable accurate statements, but the information you're getting is useful, especially in what you're asking about. All of that are considerations for the purpose, the goals, what you want to get out of this. Now, and we'll take questions here in a second, but to finish up, I am doing a 4-week version of this class, this lecture, diving heavily deep into it. We're going to talk about cold reading, about determining frauds and real psychics, talk about fake psychokinesis, all that stuff, investigative psychics and mediums. It's starting the beginning of May. It's called The Practical Guide to Psychics and Mediums. These are online classes for the Rhine Education Center. They're reasonably priced. The other courses you see listed, I'm also teaching one on the evidence for survival of bodily death. That's the human consciousness and survival studies. And then I'll also be teaching, because I have an anthropology background, a cross-cultural look at how psychic abilities and experiences and phenomena show up in other cultures, and how cultures affect not only the kinds of experiences people have, but also the reporting of them and the interpretation. And then Jimmy Aiken is going to be teaching the introduction to parapsychology, kind of an overall review of the field. And John Kruth, who's our research director and the executive director of the Rhine Research Center, will be teaching about 8 important studies in parapsychology, a couple of which have to do with fieldwork. So that's what we're doing there. And here is my contact information for you. And I do have a website. So if you write anything down, the easiest thing to write down is LoydAuerbach.com. Remember to spell my name with 1 L. You'll be able to contact me through the website, or there's my Gmail address. And then I'm on Facebook and most social media. The links are there to the Rhine Research Center, the Forever Family Foundation. And then I do have 3 YouTube channels, one of which is my Ask Professor Paranormal YouTube channel. That is a live Q&A that I do on YouTube every other Sunday. In fact, I have one coming up this coming Sunday on the 19th, 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It is an hour session. People just ask me questions about the paranormal, about pop culture sometimes. In fact, I think we spent most of the last session talking about ghost movies. And then I have one that has a lot of my old TV segments, and another one with a few other lectures. And I will stop sharing so we can take some questions.
Thank you, Loyd. That was so amazing. We do have 2 questions. One I'm going to ask first before we go back to a previous question that was asked. And it was, one last question. Do you believe when psychics or mediums say they come from generations of family of psychics or mediums that's all the certification? It
is, there's 2 things about the family thing that's there. It's not a certification, certainly. I mean, if your father or mother was a really well-known psychic, you might not be. So it seems to be a genetic component. But the thing is that if we're in a family that talks about, supports being psychic, just about every kid will get some degree of psychic ability because they have that as a kid. Most of us had psychic abilities as little children, but we get educated out of it. Our culture tells us this stuff is not real. In a family that is supportive of that will help develop it. And especially if it's a situation where a family member is psychic. And especially if it's generations of that. If that's the family tradition, then that is very likely to be the case. But you may actually not have the same abilities that your grandmother or father had either, for that matter.
Okay. And then we do have one question that they said to hold till the end. So we'll save it for
The
last.
Estes method.
But Jerry and the Estes method. Yep.
So the Estes method was an attempt to bring in what we do in the Ganzfeld methodology for research, which is a mild sensory deprivation situation. The idea that mild sensory deprivation might allow you to focus more on what you're getting psychically, what pops into your head kind of thing. That's an important thing. And it does work very well in the Ganzfeld. We're not trying to communicate with spirits in the Ganzfeld situation. It's really what's going on in another room, usually with someone else who's observing a video or a photo or something like that.
Okay.
So there was an attempt for that. So the problem with the Estes method is, number one, you still have interpretation of static that's happening. And that's pareidolia, unless it's absolutely clear. They're what people call class A EVP. So that is happening absolutely in the Estes method. The other problem is the person who is interpreting generally knows the questions that are going to be asked. And the cadence the questions are going to be asked.
Yep.
So now they're interpreting the static based on the questions that they know are going to be asked.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, just free, front loading everything. And
Yep.
It's not necessarily psychic at all. It's psychological in that sense.
Yep. And then one more question, because I'm sure Tiffany has a whole bunch of questions to ask, because I can see it in her face. But Anton wants to know, off topic, hold till the end, but we're going to get to it now.
Yeah.
Does the Ryan Institute do any research in discovering the spiritual domain, maybe spiritual crossover, such as multidimensional?
So no, I'll say no. The Ryan Research Center focuses on living people and what we can do in laboratory experiments. A lot of it sometimes depends on what grants or funding there happens to be. One of the major research studies that's been going on for a while, it's on hold right now. The Ryan Center, we lost our lease. They sold the building out from under us last fall, and we are financially in a good position where we're going to buy a building. But the research director is looking for a good building to buy in Durham, North Carolina, and commercial real estate that suits our purposes. In the meantime, he was doing research on healing or healers and other people who could produce biophotons, which are a real thing, by the way. Biophotons are particles of light that are given off by the brain right through the skull and right through us. There is other research. You can look that term up. There's a lot of research going on. Plants give off biophotons. Humans give off biophotons, all of that. And so you have a very special laboratory setup, which is not pitch dark. It's completely dark. There's a photomultiplier tube, which can detect as many as 1 photon per second. So we're talking about incredibly low light, no light, essentially. So John's brought in normal folks, to see if they could try to be healers. Not much changes. It's usually 3 to 5, for some people 3 to 15 biophotons per second. Bringing in a healer. There was a healer that brought in. He hit over 500 biophotons per second at one point when he was kind of doing his healing energy thing. A couple of martial artists, one in particular, hit 1 million photons per second by moving chi around the room. So this is still a psychic thing. It's a psychokinetic thing in some respects to affect our own bodies. There's been other research like we're doing Ganzfeld research as well at the lab, but the life after death, the survival research is not being done and really has not been done in laboratory studies. And realistically, you can't do a laboratory situation looking at spirits. You can do work with mediums, like I said, but not with spirits, mainly because we can't hold them to a schedule. Go figure. So the best kind of research into what the spiritual realm is, and this is something I should have said. So mediums get asked about this. What's the afterlife like? And it all sounds very human. And that the mediums will say it's because if it's different than what human experience is, I could not even tell you what it is. I couldn't describe it. I wouldn't have words for that. So as a science fiction person would say, it's more different than we can imagine. You're without a body. I mean, it's got to be different.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
I do want to ask a question for people who are not used to, I guess for people who are not used to understanding what a leading question is. How should a person, especially somebody who's never gone to a psychic before, how should they set boundaries so that they're not giving away information, but also not disrupting the process? Because that might be a little bit confusing for a lot of people.
Oh, sure. Well, first, I think it's important to have a conversation with the psychic or medium before you get the reading, before the reading actually starts. Not only what's their process, but, what do you want me to, if you say something, do you want me to respond? If they haven't said something about that, how do you want me to respond? So, for example, when the mediums are doing the gallery readings for the Forever Family Foundation, they'll give instructions to the entire audience. And one of the instructions is, if I say something and looks like I'm looking for a response, because I may not ask you for a response, respond with yes or no. True or false. That's it. Don't give me any more information. Don't make any more statements. And so it should not be a conversation with the medium. The medium should be having a conversation with the spirit and providing you with information which you can confirm or say, no, that's not right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best thing to do with that.
Great.
Anything else?
You were very thorough.
Been teaching this stuff for a long time. What can I say?
Heather's muted. There you
Yeah,
go.
sorry.
You're muted.
I do that all the time because I didn't want you to hear me typing away in the background. But yeah, you were thorough. You answered all my questions, and I don't see any other questions except for Jerry did ask. You don't think there are other dimensions?
I didn't say that. Did I say that? I don't even think I used.
You did not say that. No, I would have remembered if you had.
Yeah. I mean, first, it depends on what you mean by dimension. I kind of know what you mean by dimension. Not in the mathematical physics sense, but in the, like our 3D, 4D world, but more in the parallel, in the science fiction comic book sense of other dimensions. I think there are. I mean, we can't say there are not. We can't even say there are not parallel universes. There is a multi-universe. The whole idea of the multiverse is something that physics does look at and has been proposed. It can't be proven at this point, but I think that there is likely a different state of existence that doesn't follow our physical laws, which would put it in another dimension, where our consciousness goes when we go to the so-called other side. That's what I think is going on. I just don't know what it is. How, I'm hoping I know how to get there when I die. Although I plan on kind of doing a little travel on Earth before when I'm a ghost before I move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually one question that go ahead.
I was saying, I have a plan. And being a Star Trek fan, I'm planning on leaving the planet for a little while too.
So one question that I did just think of is, I mean, I know I have the ability, but I choose not to develop it just because I kind of push it to the background because I prefer research over developing my psychic abilities.
I'm with you.
Okay. How would you recommend someone who's in a similar situation kind of get through it? You understand what I'm trying to say? How to get through it without
how to block it, how to block it and not to have. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, first, if you intellectualize so much and second guess yourself, you won't ever have it. That's an easy way to deal with that. That's how people get away from it.
We both have that.
Yeah, they get away from dealing with it. And but the other thing is, there's one of the things we run into in our field, and there are therapists and other folks, small number, who actually help people with this, and psychics who help people with this, and people often mistake this as psychic attack. Where they suddenly start getting information, and even from other people, and they think it's negative and it's too much information. I suspect Gen Z won't have a problem with that, but because they're already getting too much information anyway. So, The idea is that we as human beings generally don't get inundated by environmental information too much. I mean, granted, a loud noise, a flash of light's going to get our attention, right? The shiny keys kind of thing. Because the way our perception works, our normal perception works, we attend to certain things. We don't pay attention to sounds that are in the background after a while. So if there's a really annoying road noise in the background, we almost have a noise filter like Zoom does. We stop hearing that until someone visits us and say, how can you sleep with that road noise out there? And so all of a sudden, now I have to get used to it again. I have to pretend like it's not there. And that's the same kind of thing. So we have those filters that are set up psychically as well. But sometimes those filters drop and then people have too much. And whether it is picking up information from the environment, whether it's picking up information from other people, and emotions are a big problem, picking up other people's emotions, whether it's seeing ghosts, whatever, the easiest, and this is an easy thing to do, but you got to stick with it for a little bit. The easiest exercise, which comes from a number of spiritual traditions, it also comes from a number of psychic traditions. It is something that psychics teach. It is almost a Star Wars thing. You picture yourself or visualize or imagine yourself with a force field or bubble around yourself, like a shield.
Right.
And this is key. You imagine information or ghosts or other things hitting the shield and bouncing off. That's a key thing that a psychic named Echo Bodine mentioned. In fact, when you're doing this, you want to really pay attention to doing this for a few minutes every day until it becomes second nature. Snap up the field real quick. And Echo actually this is kind of an interesting thing. We did a conference together. She had a little pendant, and the pendant was a little mirror, like a little lipstick mirror. And somebody asked what the mirror is for. And she said, it's a reminder to reflect back any negative stuff that is thrown at me. Because I can just do that by putting up my shield. And so she suggested, if you're going to try doing this and you're having a hard time visualizing, sit somewhere, get some cheap, like dollar store mirrors, small ones, put them facing outward in a circle around you so that they're reflecting things away from you. And this becomes second nature. I did have someone years ago who came to me here in the Bay Area. She could only go outside amongst people. Like, she couldn't go food shopping, except like at midnight in the 24-hour grocery stores, because she was picking up people's emotions too much. It was hurting her. And her husband verified that and gave her this shielding technique. And not only was she able to come to class about a month later after practicing this, come to an actual class, but she actually learned to open up when she wanted to, so she could be a psychic. So she had control.
Okay. Yeah. And that's good to know, because we would be in public, especially like at Disney, for example, and I would just start crying.
You need the psychic shield.
Sad. I wasn't sad or anything, but I would just start wanting to cry.
Yeah.
And it took me forever to figure out why that was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard sometimes to figure out that it's coming from outside instead of inside somewhere. Yep. And this is one technique of blocking it from the outside.
I have to remember that. Thank you.
It's a good one. I did have a question that popped in my head. Can we touch on psychometry a little bit? Would that fall under remote viewing?
No, because it's not remote.
Right. Okay.
So psychometry. All right. So I love psychometry.
Okay.
I have taught for many years a developing your intuition, actually developing your ESP class. And psychometry and I've done it live in person, not just online. It's one of the easiest things for people to learn psychically. Oh, wow. And what's key here for this or for remote viewing or any other psychic work is not second guessing, getting out of your own way. So the idea of psychometry is you touch or hold an object. People like to do old objects, and you just let whatever pops in your mind pop into your mind. And if you really want to keep track of it, you have a recorder and you start speaking whatever's popping. You just describe what's coming in, but don't even think about what it is, because it may not be complete. Just pick up whatever. Right. Just free associate. And when you've done that with things that you can see, because that's going to give you visual cues also, have somebody give you an object that's in a paper bag. or a cloth bag. So now you can feel it's a ring, but you can't tell what its attribute, what it looks like, or whether it's old or anything like that. Try it again, because psychometry works through cloth or bags.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised at how many things you accidentally or really psychically pick up after trying this with a few things. And not every object is something you're going to pick up. What I usually had people do is bring a bunch of objects and put them in a pile, have people say, pick something else that's not yours. If you don't get anything from it, put it back, take something else, try something else. And inevitably people can pick something up. And I'll tell you the funniest one that I had, because I brought a bunch of stuff for a class in cloth bags, cloth and paper bags. And I have it right here still. I had an item that was in a cloth bag, which was quite heavy. It had an unusual shape to it, which I'll show you in a moment. And nobody was getting much of anything other than somebody said, "Is this from Las Vegas?" That's what one person said. Another person did say, "It's very heavy. It's pretending to be like gold because it's so heavy." Because they knew that I wouldn't be bringing something that heavy, that like a bar of gold. The other person immediately picks it up and says, "Oh, is this a piece of gold pressed latinum from Deep Space Nine? Star Trek."
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow.
She was a Star Trek fan. She said, "Where'd you get that?" And it was actually from Las Vegas when they had the Star Trek experience at the Hilton for a while, years ago.
Wow. That's awesome.
So people sometimes get really unusual hits. I had an old watch in a bag, I had two different watches. One was my grandfather's. The other was someone I knew who was still alive. And they said, "This person's still alive, and I don't get that they're related to you at all." And that's all they got. The other person said, "This is from your grandfather," and started giving like information about my grandfather. And that was not a psychic. But the key, again, is whatever pops in your head, spit it out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to figure out what it is until later on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I will say also one thing is that when you are in a haunted house, a haunted place, because residual hauntings are information in the environment, you are in the object. You are doing psychometry, which is a form of clairvoyance.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and that was one question. Hold on 1 second. There we go.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yep.
Because you're getting information real, even though it's historical. I mean, sometimes we think it might be what's called retrocognition, that the object is kind of giving you a way to look into the past, just like we can look into the future. Mm-hmm. But I tend to think it's the object itself holding in information.
Yep. Perfect. Anything else, Tiffany?
No, that's it.
No.
Like I said, he was very thorough.
I had a list of questions that I was checking off as he was answering them as he went. So,
well, you can always join me for Ask Professor Paranormal on Sunday.
Awesome.
And bring those questions. Yeah,
definitely will. Thank you again for being on tonight. We look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Just a few quick things before we end. Join us next week. We do have, I rescheduled him, but Joe Frankie will be joining us for our Ouija or Not Ouija presentation that we've done at conferences such as Phantasm in Florida. It's a fun little play on each other. I take the side of, yes, you can use a Ouija board. He takes the side of, no, you cannot. So it's kind of a little interesting tidbit there. So join us for that next week. And as always, thank you for joining us. We will see you every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. You guys have a great night.
Good night, guys.
Good night.